I am here today not as a very good speaker, first and foremost, and secondly, not as an expert on video hiring. So I'm just setting the expectations where they should be at the start. But what I have done is I've been part of, I guess, an initiative to rethink our talent acquisition strategy over the last couple of years. We completely revamped our processes. We digitized hugely in what we were doing. And part of that was video hiring. And the title, Don't Just Do It, I did just do it with various business groups. I have made many mistakes, which I'm hoping I can, possibly part, some sort of pearls of wisdom on this and, help anyone who's about to go through this kind of process. Who here is using video hiring at the moment versus right, so we've got a few. Who's thinking about video hiring as the next step? Okay, great. So this is probably more for the people thinking about it, but hopefully there's a couple of bits for everyone. So the first thing I would say from my rough knowledge of this is that when you start thinking about video hiring or in fact any piece of tech that's going to be a part of your talent acquisition strategy, strip it right back at the start to what you are, what your mission is as an in-house recruiter or a talent acquisition partner. The way I thought about it, and probably this applies for everybody here, is that we've got to hire great people. We've got to hire great people that fit our cultures and therefore stay, because that's where your value is. And we've got to do it as quickly as possible because the business needs bums on seats, you need to grow, whatever else, it needs to be done. We are all familiar with this. Now, typically or historically, I would say over probably the last 10, 15 years, the metrics which have defined our success as in-house recruiters have looked a bit like this, or they certainly have for me. So you've got your time to fill, i.e. time from when your job requisition is opened to when a candidate signs on the dotted line. You've got your cost per hire, which for me has always been defined as your talent acquisition group, the cost of the people, plus the tech stack they're using and all the rest. And you've got your head count, which for most businesses, if they're in growth mode, is we're going to grow by X%, therefore we need Y people. We've got an attrition rate on top of that, so this is your headcount plan for the year. Every time that I've gone into any kind of meeting, these have been the metrics that have been thrown at me. But these metrics happened, or were invented, if you like, in a time where companies were able to choose the candidates they wanted for their business. Whereas nowadays, we're actually in a world where the candidates are choosing the companies they want to work for. We did a bunch of research on this internally. We found a couple of interesting statistics. So the big one for me was 75% of candidates that we talked to, and this is thousands, 75% of candidates would research us online before applying for a job. And out of that 75%, 70% would not apply for that job if you had a bad reputation. So they're looking at your employer brand, they're looking at Muse in the US, they're looking at Glassdoor, they're investigating their social networks. And if it comes back that it isn't good, they're not applying. The second thing I would say is that out of a pool of candidates that we took, where these were candidates who had a positive experience but didn't get a job offer at that point, over 90% of them would reapply, and over 90% of them would refer a friend to apply for that company as well. So for me, the metrics that I wanted to use when looking at video hiring specifically was to start looking at these things. So candidate experience, employee engagement, all feeding into employment brand. Now, the key here in the end is your employment brand, because ultimately, if you've got 75% of your candidates that aren't going to apply if you've got a bad reputation, there is a difference of 1 in 4 between two companies that are the same, but one with a bad reputation and one with a good reputation. That's 4 times the talent funnel that you get if you have a good employment brand. As recruiters, candidate experience is the thing we can affect the most. if we start getting our hiring right and identifying the right people, that's going to have a result on employee engagement, and those together is what makes your employment brand. So what do candidates actually want from any process? So I would look at this and I would say that ultimately candidates don't really mind rejection. All right, they're pretty good at taking a no. But what they don't like is a lack of respect for their time or a lack of respect for them as a person being greeted on an equal level. What they don't like is a lack of transparency, and what they don't like is perceived bias. And the other thing they hate is not getting any kind of feedback or getting wishy-washy feedback that didn't relate to them and their experience within the process. So what has this got to do with your video interviews? Well, video interviewing for me, and the way that I'm, to clarify this, I'm talking about automated video interviews. There was a big opportunity for us, and this probably resonates, hopefully, with all of you, or else we're doing it really wrong. But how many people here, for example, have set up a phone call with a hiring manager and the hiring manager hasn't showed up? Right. Oh, good. I'm glad there's more than 50%. How many people have arranged WebEx interviews that are going to include some sort of technical test whereby you've had problems with the technology and for one reason or another it hasn't worked? Right? Now, imagine if you're doing this on a regular basis with all your candidates. You get to a point where these candidates are having to invest time, probably not at the ideal time for themselves, probably on a day that doesn't quite work for them. It's then getting rearranged potentially 2 times. They can be 4 weeks down the line before they have any kind of traction with your company. That is not a practice that says to that person that you actually care about them at all, right? So that was the first thing. It gives candidates the chance to do this on their own terms, if you get it right. The second thing is it gave us a chance to completely rethink or refresh what our views were on the questions we were asking candidates. Now, hiring managers change all the time. They certainly do in the tech world. Recruitment continues relentlessly. So it was great to get a chance to actually sit down and go, okay, what makes a candidate successful for this specific role? And we came to the point where we actually started to get some really good competency-based and behavioral-based questions that we could ask the candidates. So it was a great opportunity to refresh that and start looking at that kind of basis for your talent pool. Now, the reason I bring that up is because if you get it right, and I say if, because I will go through my huge mistakes in a second, you get this kind of scenario where candidates, it's going to save them time. They're getting questions that they know are relevant to the role, hopefully, and they know they're the same for everyone. So it removes this massive question mark that always sits over any sort of job application that you go through, which is, have they just given it to their friend? Have they got some sort of bias because of the companies I've been at? Who knows? And it also gives you a chance as the in-house recruitment team to start giving some structured feedback to candidates, which is based, and you can see it, and you can start giving them stuff that they can actually use to get better and get closer to where they want to go. And if you do that, you will end up giving these candidates a positive experience, which will feed into your brand as a company and will increase your talent pool for the future. Now, I say all this kind of nirvana of recruitment through video hiring. I can tell you that it is not that simple. And when I did first just do it, I made a huge mistake straight off the bat, which was in the rush to create these video experiences and get it automated. We got all the questions down. We sat with the hiring managers. We created fantastic questions, I think. We sent this out, but the way that we conducted the video hire was we actually had typed questions as part of the video process. Now, the problem with that was that although we told them this was the way it was going to be, candidates were turning up, well, they were switching on their computers, and they were getting ready to do this test, and we actually had a scenario whereby the candidate is sitting there being videoed to then be judged and examined. And on the other side of that, our reciprocal to that is to send them a bit of text. It's just not, it's not mutual. There's no respect in it. And actually, it's an indication that you haven't thought it through well enough. We got some quick wins just by not having to mess around with technology on WebExes and rearrange phone calls, but ultimately, we saw a dip in our candidate experience. We saw a dip in our employment brand. So when you do this, the number one key is you have to get your hiring managers invested. You have to get them to a point where they're going to start videoing a welcome to your company, giving you a couple of sentences on what it's like to work for their business group, telling you a bit about what they're about to come up against in the questions and why you're asking them. Then you go into the questions and you make sure that they're videoed as well. So you've got video on one side, and then you get reciprocal video on the other side, and you'll get much better engagement because it shows you're invested in it. The other pitfall, and the huge one for me, was process. So when we started this, and I think probably a big problem we had is that there is a fundamental distrust in online technology from a lot of hiring managers. And for us, we work globally. We have different hiring managers at different groups. Some of them are pretty old school, some of them are not. They didn't really think that this was a way that could work. So what we ended up doing was we had the old process where we screened the resumes, phoned the candidates, and then maybe instead of the pre-hire assessment, we'd put the video hire in. Then once that was done, we would do a phone interview with the hiring manager, and guess what? We still had to rearrange phone calls or WebEx calls or whatever it happened to be. After that, we do the on-site video, and then maybe we get the hire. But I can tell you that in any process that goes like that, the more steps you put in, the more chance you're going to lose to your competition, because they are savvy, and they know that if they can cut that down, they're going to get to candidates faster, and they're also offering a better experience in the process. So if you're going to get the most out of video hiring, you have to go for it, and you have to dive in and use your video hiring as a way to cut out a lot of that fluff and use it as a way to really look at the questions, get the answers you need, and make a call on who you're going to take on site and make the hire. Now, I will say that I'm talking a good game as if this is easy and that if you do that, it's going to work. We get huge amounts of resistance to this still today in our business groups. We've probably got a couple heading in the right direction. There's a couple that are flagging behind. So success is not a straight line, but I do think that the road that we're on, we can get to a point where we can become data-centric in our approach. If we do that right, we're going to start increasing our talent pool based on capabilities, based on the right behaviors rather than unconscious bias that you might pick up in a CV screen, unconscious bias that you might pick up in a phone interview with yourself, with a hiring manager, whatever it happens to be. And it will ultimately lead to a scenario where you should be able to increase your candidate experience. You should be able to get to a point where that's going to increase your employment brand, and that's going to increase your talent pool. And if it goes well, it will also flick back to your old metrics of time to fill and cost per hire and have a positive effect on them as well. That is all I've got to say on this subject. So I'm going to open it up to any questions and go from there.